Thanks everyone for being here. Today we're talking about winning the right to food in Toronto. We're grateful for everyone joining us in conversation today. My name is Day Walker. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Indigenous Community Action Coordinator at FoodShare. We would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. FoodShare acknowledges that the sacred land in which we operate is situated upon the traditional territories of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands around the Great Lakes. FoodShare recognizes the many nations of Indigenous people who presently live on this land, those who have spent time here, and the ancestors who have hunted and gathered on this land known as Turtle Island. FoodShare recognizes and supports the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, applying both to our work. FoodShare also acknowledges the many people of African descent who are not settlers, but whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as part of the transatlantic slave trade, brought against their will and made to work on these lands. Despite the ongoing violence inflicted on Indigenous peoples and Black Canadians, FoodShare is grateful for the care and contributions made to the land by Indigenous land and water defenders and Black food growers and farmers. We believe that advancing Indigenous sovereignty is deeply and inextricably linked to Black liberation and we remain committed to advancing both, because without care and respect for the land, there is no food for us. With the intention of deepening our understanding of the interconnected nature of these issues, acknowledging the land is a reminder for all of us to show up and do the work of educating ourselves on the ways in which various systems of oppression are connected, as well as our responsibilities as treaty peoples. As we think about moving land acknowledgements from words to actions, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the land in which you are situated and the ways in which those of you who are allies can support the process of reconciliation in your own lives. Now I will hand it over to Hansel, who will be moderating the conversation today.
Thank you, Day. So my name is Hansel Igbavboa. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Right to Food Coordinator here at FoodShare. I'm really excited for the conversation today. So in no particular order, I will now introduce our speakers for today. So we have Antonio Lawrence. Antonio loves making other people's day brighter with love, compassion, laughter, and food. Her passion for other people has burned brightly since a young age, and it's so amazing how full circle that passion has come in the form of Uplift Kitchen. When she's not running around sourcing donations, clothing, or food for the Uplift families, you can find her snuggled in bed with a good book or buying yet another houseplant, because you can never have too many. I agree. Next, we have Josephine Gray. Josephine Gray has been a human rights advocate, community organizer, and public speaker for more than 30 years. In 1986, she co-founded Low Income Families Together, LIFT, in Toronto, a resource center for basic human rights and incubating community projects. Josephine was also a founding director and co-chair of FoodShare from 1988 to 94, as well as Project Esperance, the Income Security Advocacy Center, and the St. Jamestown Community Cooperative, to name a few. In 1995, Josephine was appointed Canada's official observer for domestic issues to the UN World Summit on Social Development. She presented the Ontario People's Report to the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ESCR, in 1998, and another report on the ESCR in St. Jamestown in 2006, and is willing to report again soon to the UN on the food crisis facing our vulnerable communities. Currently, she's leading the Oasis Food Hub pilot project for climate resilience, healthy food security in her high-rise neighborhood of St. Jamestown. Josephine is a widowed single parent of 4, a grandmother, and a social housing tenant. She's dedicated to cultivating human rights and community-based solutions to humanity's greatest challenges: food insecurity, extreme inequality, and ecoclimate chaos. Laurie Hamiston. Laurie Hamiston is an Anishinaabe Kwe from Batchwana First Nations in Northern Ontario, where her family resides in the community of Rankin Reserve. Lori is a strong advocate, community practitioner, and partnership specialist with over 25 years of experience working in the Indigenous community on local, provincial, and national level. Her work has spanned across Indigenous health, well-being, family, infant and child development, education and training, homelessness, mental health and addictions, violence against women, and human trafficking and exploitation within Indigenous communities. She works out of her collective, Kwewak Naki, an Indigenous women's collective based in Toronto, focused on community development, engagement, training, and program support and organizational development. Lori is currently leading Dashmawan Bamazinjin, They Feed the People, which is an Indigenous food sovereignty and community wellness project in Toronto. And we have Zakaya Tafarai. Zakaya Tafarai has been directly and indirectly involved in food justice work since he was 15 as the son of community leaders, educators, and food sovereignty activists, Anen Lololi and Anyika Tafarai, who founded the African Food Basket. Zakaya has been involved in the community gardening and urban farming since the 90s and knows firsthand the impact of food justice work. As a second generation community leader and activist, Zakaya's life changed at the age of 22 when he became a father. Since then, fatherhood has further driven his passion to uplift and impact the community. Zakaya has worked to further develop service delivery frameworks that address social determinants of health with a focus on providing support to young racialized families using holistic models. In 2017, Zakaya became a program manager at the African Food Basket, supporting its Cultivating Youth Leadership program, as well as their Food as Medicine. In 2020, Zakaya helped to found the Black Food Toronto Emergency Food Support Program and responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on food insecurity affecting Toronto African Caribbean Black communities. Thank you all so much for being here today and taking time out of your busy schedules. I'm just gonna have some quick housekeeping notes and we're gonna go right into the questions. So for the audience watching today, you can contribute questions for the panelists using the chat function and not the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen or the live chat on Instagram. Keep your questions coming throughout the discussions. And I just want to say thank you to all the FoodShare supporting on the call today, Mo, Peter, Andrea, and Renee. I have some questions for the speakers that we'll discuss and we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. So I'm just gonna get right into the questions. So our first question for today is, tell us about the work you do through your organization and the impact it has on your community. And why is this work important or critical in this time we're in? I'd love to hear from you, Lori.
Miigwech. Hello, everyone. Anine. Yeah, my name is Lori Hermiston, and as my introduction said, I come from the North Shore of Ontario, a little community there called Sault Ste. Marie, where my family resides in my First Nation in Rankin Reserve, which is part of Batchewana First Nation. So that's me. That's where I come from. I am Eagle Clan, and I do have names and colors and things I connect within my community, but I save those for ceremony usually. But I will tell you that I am Eagle Clan, and a big part of my clan responsibility is to be a leader in the community and understand the needs of our people and really bring them home. And I was once told that, you know, we're fire starters. So we're the ones in the community that get the fire going and move ideas and energy through to meet the needs of our people. So that's a bit about where I come from. And I think it's important that, you know, as an Indigenous person, I'm able to introduce myself in that way, and that it's understood, you know, that I do have I come from a particular society in my community. And that's a big part of, I think, where the food sovereignty conversation lies within Indigenous understandings of knowing and being is that everybody has a role in our community. Everybody has a job, and Dash Mwamba Modzijin really is about that. What we're doing within our project is reigniting, re-understanding, and really bringing matriarchal roles into our community. It was started alongside of an organization in Toronto called Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction. So we started really last June, June of 2020. We started on June 21st doing feasts and gatherings in the Parkdale community here in Toronto, and bringing ceremony and celebration along with food and just, community gathering into that neighborhood, and really with a very strong harm reduction approach attached to it. That really is that principle of everybody has the right to gather and understand our culture and our ceremonies, and food is a big part of that. So we started doing those gatherings with them and bringing cultural food and whole local ingredients, things that people hadn't had for quite some time. I recall when we brought the food down, one of the first things that one of the people said to us when they had some perch was they knew it was Lake Erie perch. So the connection to the land, the importance of that, and what that means to our people, and really, bringing back those really good memories. And we started to notice that people really hadn't even had things like moose meat or fresh fish or deer or wild rice for quite some time. So every week when we brought that down, it was a really good opportunity to gather and tell stories and find our relatives and, work alongside of our family and our friends. We essentially also, started to do food for the elders and bring food down to Wigwam and Terrace and do meals for them weekly, because again, we're really missing that connection to cultural prepared food. We have been doing that since, as I said, June of 2020, and really amped up with the elders in in January of 2021. So we've been consistently offering that food and connecting with the community through food, and really, bringing important supports through food as the introduction, really, right, to understanding what people need and how they need it. So yeah, that's sort of a bit about Dash Mwan and what we are.
Yeah, thank you for that. Really important work that's happening. Zakaya, I know that African Food Basket started a lot of things during this time as well. Can you just speak to some of the work that's happening?
So the Food Basket is an organization that's been around for 25 years, championing food justice for the African Caribbean Black community. It was founded by my parents. And being very honest, when they started this organization, I was very naive to the bigger community needs. Growing up in a family that did, we garden in our backyard, we were connected to urban farms, we would go strawberry picking, corn picking. I thought these were things that everybody did. But definitely as I got into social work, I realized that not everybody has strong connections to food, and really understanding the importance of championing food justice and having access to cultural food. More specifically around COVID, we launched something called the Black Food Toronto program, because we knew that with all the lockdowns that were happening, the panic buying that was going on, members of our community were going to suffer. They were going to struggle to find food. They were going to struggle to access healthy food. And especially as the pandemic went on, our seniors, our small families, we created a system through a website called Black Food Toronto, where folks could sign up and access a fresh basket of healthy, culturally sensitive foods. We would incorporate things like avocados, sweet potatoes, ginger, mangoes when possible, giving people healthy food. We also connected with local farmers. So when corn was in season, we'd be providing them with corn. We also run an urban farm up at Black Jane and Steele's at the Black Creek Farm. And we were able to grow things like kale, callaloo, tomatoes, cucumbers, and these are things that we incorporated into our baskets. At the height of what we were doing, we were providing support to over 500 households a week through the direct delivery drop-offs, as well as working with community partners such as CAFCAN, Taibu Community Health Center, and a number of other community partners to make sure that people had access to food. As I was able to go on some of these deliveries, it was bittersweet to see people's response to getting a basket that has these kind of healthy food in it, being so thankful and so grateful to be able to have access to food. And, given the Toronto Food Charter, you would think that this would not be an issue, especially in a city like this during this day and age, but it is, and it's a constant ongoing issue. And our organization is committed to making sure that we do our part to support community, provide access to healthy, culturally sensitive food, and encourage people as much as possible to get involved in various food systems so that they can be part of the solution themselves.
Thank you, Zakai. Talking about on food insecurity being an ongoing issue that's always been a problem in our city, in Canada. Josephine, I know you've been in this work for many, many years. Can you speak to, the work you do and why it is also very critical at this time?
Well, thank you, Hansel. So as a single parent raising 4 to 5 children, depending who was in the house, for many years in a very poor downtown neighborhood, very, very diverse downtown neighborhood, I've seen a lot of changes over time. One of the long-term issues that we've had in this neighborhood, as we are a arrival place for newcomers, but also a place where there are many Indigenous people in our immediate neighborhood. One of the concerns that many people have had is the quality of food that was available to them in the low price discount grocery stores. People really recognizing that a lot of the food they were able to afford was not good for them, and seeing that newcomers' health tends to deteriorate fairly rapidly. So this has been a long-term concern. We got very busy around 2011, working on trying to figure out how to help newcomers access more healthy food and navigate the North American food system, which is a very corporatized food system, more so than most of the world. I've watched many shifts and changes in our governance, in the way in which our democracy is no longer a democracy and the like. And it's been really frightening to see, the trade rules, trade regimes, NAFTA, WTO, et cetera, how it plays out on the ground in our community in reducing and limiting our choices, our time, our incomes, and so many other things. So when the pandemic hit, we were in the process of a long, exhausting process of trying to create a local, full cycle, eco-smart, healthy food hub. And we pivoted right away as fast as we could to try and do an emergency food project. And we allied with African Food Basket, FoodShare, and others to try and bring as much healthy food into the neighborhood as we could. And in our neighborhood, that's a challenge because we want to fulfill the human right to food, and that includes affordable, healthy, clean, culturally appropriate, and making sure people have choice. So naturally, when you're doing emergency food and people are tired of and way too accustomed to the limited choices that food banks offer, they were very excited and very happy that somebody cared and that they also could be directly involved in the process. We got lots and lots of volunteers and were able to deliver to all the buildings in this high-rise community, some 500 or so families every month. But then, we lost a little space we had in the community center and to a vaccination clinic that took the space, and we tried to operate outside for a number of months, and now we've had to stop that. And right now, all we can really do is work with our local farmers to do a weekly farmers market, and we're waiting for some form of space so that we can work on the right to food again in St. Jamestown. It's been a pretty awful time, frankly. And it seems to be just things getting worse rather than better at a time when the need is getting greater and greater.
Thank you, Josephine. I know that I think there's a common thread of initiatives being put out due to the COVID-19, but we understand that these has been ongoing long-term program issues that we've been experiencing in our city. And then Tony, I just wanted to ask you what motivated you to start Uplification and to start this work during the start of the pandemic, and what do you do and what impact does it have in community?
Yeah, so co-founder and I, Emily, got together. We're neighbors, we live 2 doors down from each other, and we got together and we had a conversation about what was going on in the city, especially in terms of protests and other things happening around us that we couldn't necessarily be a part of because of people within our households who were vulnerable in terms of like health. And so we couldn't just go out and participate the way that we usually would. And we had the idea that we would just do like a barbecue or something and just make a bunch of food and give it to people who were out there on the front lines who couldn't necessarily provide for themselves afterward, who needed to shelter in place, people who had lost jobs, X, Y, and Z. And as we thought more about it, we formulated the idea that maybe we start just providing food for any individuals, Black, Indigenous, or otherwise racialized folks who were in and around the city who just needed assistance. And Uplift Kitchen was born. My best friend is currently in this chat, and she is the one who gave us the name. So I just want to shout her out on that one. And it really just rounded out like the mandate of our initiative is that we really do want to uplift people regardless of what situation that they're in. And so we started beginning of June. I made an Instagram page and an email and a bank account, and I just put it out into the universe, and people were very receptive. And within one weekend, people were donating so much money. We were just like, okay, we got to do something with this. We're not really sure. We were still waiting to see if there were any individuals who needed our assistance. And people started trickling in really slowly. And then suddenly it was really quickly, and we just had to find volunteers. We were so fortunate to find people who wanted to drive, people who wanted to cook, people who wanted to bake, people who just had like containers they wanted to donate, people who have gardens and wanted to donate fresh veggies and things from there too. And so all the cooking initially came out of Emily's kitchen, and then eventually we were able to then get more and more assistance from other folks. And then it became a refrigeration issue, and we had one of our neighbors who had a fridge in her garage, and so we started storing things in there, and it just snowballed in quite the most spectacular way. And from there, we've just been assisting as many people as we possibly can. But it was wild to see how much need there is in this city, knowing that there's need in the city. I've only been living here for 3 years. I've lived a bunch of other places, but Ontario, 10 years, Toronto, 3. So I know of the food insecurity in the city, but I wasn't like really aware of it until we started doing this. And once we really got the ball rolling with it, we realized that this was going to be more of a long-term thing and not just throughout the summer. We were prepared to only do this for maybe like a month. We weren't sure what our schedules were going to look like, how often people were going to be available, if, you know, people were even going to reach out to us. But every week went by and like 2, 3, 10, 20 more people were added to the list. And we were like, okay, let's just go full tilt with this. Much like Josephine said that, yeah, it became an issue trying to find space for a bit. We had some space in Scarborough for a little bit, and we got too big for that. Then we had to pause for a bit because of another lockdown. And then we were fortunate enough to use a space out in the West End, their commercial kitchen out here. And so that has been such a lifesaver. So we have all of this extra space, extra access, all of that as well too. But yeah, starting during a pandemic is not easy. But it's been rewarding in a way that I couldn't have imagined. And I'm so grateful for the people who have assisted us so far.
Yeah, if there's anything I'm hearing so far in the conversation is that, like, you know, oftentimes the weight of addressing the problems that affect our communities are solely put on grassroots organizations. But the city of Toronto has a duty to not only alleviate food insecurity, but also address the causes that lead to food insecurity, like unlivable wages, housing crisis, and income inequity, and so much more. What have been some of the city's shortcomings, and what is their responsibility in addressing barriers and challenges that you face in your work? So what are they currently doing, and what could they do differently? I would just go with you, Lori, again first, because I know y'all had, like, you know, challenges of finding a kitchen to cook in.
Yeah, we did. So yeah, I think one of the biggest shortcomings, so I'll speak with the Indigenous piece specifically because there's, many like rich voices here that are going to talk from other spaces and places. So, and keeping in mind that I only have a few minutes, so I'm trying to coordinate my thoughts here. I think it comes down to like, what does reconciliation look like when it comes to food sovereignty and food security? You know, reconciliation is a big word right now. It's a bit of a buzzword, I think, that we're seeing across Canada, in, you know, cities and towns, and how people can do it. And it isn't just about wearing an orange shirt. You know, it's not about going out and making sure your kids all have orange shirts on Orange Shirt Day. It isn't about making sure that, you know, you're just saying that you're, you know, thinking about reconciliation. There's ways that it really is impactful. And I think one of the big things to think about with Indigenous people and food sovereignty is that us being able to control our own nutrition and our own, you know, like just our own access to food and our own access to wellness in our community allows us to continue that role that we have as stewards of the land, right? And making sure that the land is taken care of and that it's all interconnected. So, you know, I think one of the things is that we're seeing is that in our community, we have a lot of focus on wellness from social service agencies and, you know, support networks and that. But what we also see is a pretty fragmented and at times like piecemeal system of how to access food. A lot of different organizations offer food bank and, you know, food support, but it really is coming from a lot of places like Second Harvest and, you know, Daily Bread and donations. And it often can be that dented can approach of, you know, out of the kindness of my heart, we're donating this, and it's expired food. And it isn't really allowing for that opportunity to be on the land and grow the food and understand where the food comes from. Like, we have opportunities to have gardens that exist, and we definitely do have some really interesting Indigenous garden projects that are happening in Toronto, and, you know, food being grown and sourced that way, and some land-based stuff. But I think it's that collective approach as a community together. And within Dashmawan, like what we've done is we've done a lot of harvesting and a lot of foraging on the land and brought that back to the, you know, elders and heard their wonderful stories. We had an opportunity where we made lilac cake and, you know, harvested lilacs right from the trees. And the elders talked about it being something that they remembered as eating when they were children in the residential schools, because they didn't have access to sweet stuff. And they would, you know, just suck on the lilacs to get that essence and that fruit. That sweet flavor. So we made cake for them with lilacs baked into it. And, you know, it really was a nice memory that they shared during a time of immense sadness. I think the other thing is that we're dealing with so many different issues within our community that nutrition is the center of, right? Like, we've had to deal with poor nutrition from lack of access to good land to grow things on. We've had, you know, issues with residential schools, Indian hospitals. Nutrition has been used, and food has been a weapon that's been used against us. And I think the city, you know, in their big movement to look at reconciliation, often ignores the idea of what does food and food security look like in the middle of all that, and how do we address that in a larger way than just putting a word like reconciliation in something like a food charter or a food plan.
Oh my God, yes, that that is so important. I think, yeah, oftentimes, and I know many of the speakers here today can speak to that too, of like, oftentimes we hear promises, we hear a lot of words, we hear a lot of fluffy, sugary, you know, sweet talk from the city, and less of action. I know, Josephine, you can speak to this a lot, so I would love to hear, you know, what you have to say, like, what's the responsibility of the city in the work you do, and what should they be doing differently?
Well, I think for us, you know, the key thing is space. I mean, we still don't have any kind of a kitchen that we can access. There's a kitchen in the community center, but it's not certified. And they still, I mean, we've been trying to get it certified for almost 2 decades. Just, you know, absolute inertia, like complexity of a system that is, on the one hand, got downloaded way too much responsibility back in '95 when Harris was elected. All of a sudden, the city was solely responsible for far too much. Never got the actual, you know, funding that it would need to meet those responsibilities, and it's been struggling ever since. So there's a combination of problems. And like very early on in our project, we went to the city and said, look, we just need permission zoning, your support and cooperation so that we can get other capital investments, et cetera, to create a food hub so we can have better food security. And even that seems to have been too much. And I've watched year after year as one policy statement as another after another comes forward. And even more recently, the very exciting concept and commitment around Black food sovereignty, which is one of the few jurisdictions to commit to food sovereignty, particularly Black food sovereignty. And I was excited to see the recognition and awareness and efforts towards Indigenous reconciliation. Although what we're reconciling, I'm not sure. There was never a good relationship. But the lack of walk that goes with the talk is incredibly frustrating. And I don't blame any individuals, but I see a number of factors that makes it very hard for the city to function. So, even at this point where we've had to do our work outdoors because we couldn't maintain the room in the community center, they won't zone anything, won't change any zoning in the neighborhood so that we can grow food, distribute food, cook food, whatever. There's just these ridiculous obstacles that are the exact opposite of what the policy statements and commitments are. I was there at the beginning of the Food Policy Council. It was great discussions, great conversations, great direction, no enforceability, no accountability. And that's what really characterizes Canada, the province, the city, is lots of talk, no accountability, no way to make them walk. And if we're going to walk the dish with one spoon treaty and survive as a region of humans, it's going to have to change, and it's going to have to change dramatically. And the first way to change that is for civil society and civil service to be able to work together. And civil service is going to have to start being more holistic, less siloed, less linear, and less inclined and sort of programmed to pick and choose and resist and divide and conquer amongst communities. I even noticed that funding that came out for Black and Indigenous food, or was it food or just community development? It was for Black and Indigenous, and you had to tick one or the other. Well, what if you're both? And are we going to pit Black communities against Indigenous communities in the scramble for land that we've both been denied for centuries? The recognition that we need to walk this together, that we were, both enslaved and colonized, and that we need to build equity together, doesn't seem to reflect in the approach of the city or the governments that unfortunately are no longer really seemingly capable of responding or innovating.
Yeah, those are very, very important words. Honestly, there's not much I can add to that. I just say Zakir and Josephine has just mentioned, the commitment from the city to Black food sovereignty. Can you speak to that a little bit? And I know African Food Baskets has ties to that work and how it has been put out, and what do you see coming out of that in the future, and what could the city do to take actual action?
So I mean, definitely it is something to be celebrated. It's the first of its kind, but I'm very wary of what exactly does it mean. Where are the dollars attached to it? How exactly will that roll out? There's talk about increasing sustainable funding and building community capacity, but what does that mean? To me, capacity building is a nice buzzword that is used in the nonprofit sector. Let's support people in building the skills. There are so many of us who have the skills. My dad has done this work for 25 years. And I've watched him struggle to make the case. To be very honest, I don't think we would even have this Black food sovereignty plan if it wasn't for COVID-19. COVID-19 really showed everybody how close we are to not having access to food. Our community was already 24% more likely to be food insecure than anybody else. So it was only magnified through COVID-19. My dream is saying, listen, city, get out of our way. There's too much bureaucracy, there's too much red tape around things. There are so many vacant buildings across this city that the folks on this call, if we could get together and form several hubs across the city, we'd be able to increase access. And we've been asking for this for so long. Josephine has been a huge ally of mine. She's known me since I was young. And, look at that. She's known me since I was a child. I'm now an adult doing the same work, and I'm advocating beside her because nothing has changed. That is very sad. I would like for her to see, the fruits of her labor, and be able to enjoy it. People like my dad and many other advocates who've been doing this work and saying that it is important for us to not even accept handouts. Let us lead this work. Let us create the solutions for ourselves. But we are trying to do that on an unlevel playing field. You know, we talk about space, and I look at the fact that I'm almost 40 years old, and I know many individuals who've been advocating for my community before I was born. Yes, there have been tons of programs that have been funded by the government, but you know what? We've always been barred from using any of that funding to own property. You know, if we had simply owned a building, owned a center, we could turn that center into whatever we need it to be. You know, if we owned land, we can leverage the equity in that land to go and get loans to further build and grow what we need to do, but we've been barred from doing that. We get grants that give us just enough money to maybe pay somebody for a couple of weeks or a couple of years, maybe buy the produce that we need, or, you know, deliver the program, but that's it. We don't get to invest in ourselves. We don't get to invest in property. And those are the things that to me really hold us back. And if the city is really committed to making this Black Food Sovereignty Plan work, I think that's one of the most important places they need to start. You know, there are many Toronto community housing buildings that have vacant units. You know, provide those vacant units to some of the folks here on these calls, and let us create mini food hubs if we can't create the giant ones that we want. And let us provide food access right there locally in community, and let us continue this network that we've formed and support each other. And then we will be able to grow and eventually have those bigger spaces. So to me, the first thing is we need to get on an equal playing field, and we need space. It's great to be able to pack baskets. It's great to be able to cook food. But again, like, you know, the sister mentioned on this call, if we don't have storage, that's been a huge issue of us. We could bring down the cost of what we're doing if we simply had, you know, a space that had a huge cooler where we could pack baskets early and store the extra food and be able to distribute that over time. There's so many simple solutions, in my opinion, but we just need folks to understand.
Thank you, Zakiya. Antonia, do you want to speak to this question?
I have had so many conversations with people who said to me, Antonia, what would you do if someone said, hey, come chat with so-and-so who works in said office who does X, Y, and Z? And I said, I don't want to be in that office. I want to bring them to these spaces, the places where all the people who need this funding are. I want them to see all the individuals who are working day in, day out, 70 plus hours on top of their 40 to 60 hour work weeks to do the work that they're doing. I want them to see where the money is going that they have to collect from family members and from strangers. Like, Uplift Kitchen is a grassroots organization. Like, we're not registered. It is very hard to find funding if you're not registered, if you don't have a trustee, if you don't have somebody who can like advocate for you. We have depended so heavily on like the love donations from other people, but grants are where it's at. And if we can't apply for grants, if we can't get grants that are going to actually last us for more than like 6 months, we're back to where we started again. And I want those individuals who are making policies, who are writing things and putting in place and patting themselves on the back to be here with us in the mud and look and go, damn, $60,000 isn't enough. Damn, like $100,000 isn't enough. Like, I need them to look, I need them to see the struggle for what it is and not just like see it in a TV interview or read about it in an article. Like, they're so detached from it that when they hand out money, they literally are like, okay, cool, this is enough, like they'll figure it out. No, like, I need them to be right here with us and seeing everything that we're seeing, because man, it's hard. And again, like, we've been doing Uplift Kitchen for 1.5 years now, a little less than 1.5 years. And the people that we've been in contact with, the organizations who have reached out to us to support, the individuals who have come to assist in all sorts of ways, who've been like, how are you doing this? And we're like, couldn't tell you. We're just figuring it out day by day. That part is so frustrating because we shouldn't have to just figure it out. We should be able to depend on the people who are in these positions in the city of Toronto and in these positions who have the funding, have the access to be able to do what they can do and actually assist us. And instead they're holding on to this money for what? Where is this money? Like, we talk so much about all these things that were put in place like last year. Where is it? Like, I want to know, did it just disappear? Like, was it just a fun little, you know, yeah, there's X amount of money, but it's not, is it monopoly? Like, where is it? I have so many questions. And there's no answers. And that's the most frustrating part for me.
Yeah, thank you. I think the next question is really fitting because everyone has really spoken to this, and it is like, what is the future of this work? And what is the importance of Black and Indigenous communities achieving food sovereignty? Honestly, really, it's just a talking about like, you know, what do we need to get there and how could this look like?
If I could jump in, I mean, to me, the reality is the future of this work is more people needing, you know, trying to stretch the little bit that we have so much more. And I think this is why we're at a pivotal time, you know. A lot you'll hear on the news about recovery and how we're recovering out of COVID-19 and how we're going to move forward and build better and all these kind of phrases. Empower us to do that. You know, give us the resources so that we can do that work and support our community because we know best. What's crazy about this for me sometimes is that we're fighting to get back our own tax dollars. You know,
Yeah.
we're fighting to get back money that we've already put into these systems,
Yeah.
whether it's, you know, municipally, provincially, or federally. And it's so hard. You know, you have to go through so much red tape. If you're not this, if you're not that, it is very hard. But yet so much people do it. You know, one of the things that we did at the beginning of the pandemic was we reached out to organizations that serve the Black community. And we simply asked them, you know, how have you been impacted by COVID and what are the programs that you are no longer offering? And do any of those programs provide a meal? There are many community groups that don't even know that they're doing food sovereignty work, they're doing food justice work by simply providing a snack or a meal at their after school program, at their lunch program, you know, at their seniors program. To many in community, that meal is a staple part of their day. You know, if they don't get that meal, they may not get a meal when they get home. You know, so parents sometimes send their kids to an after school program, not just because the program can better their capacity or anything like that, simply because the program is going to offer them a meal. You know, and that is something that bureaucrats don't typically hear or understand. And they don't realize that, you know, increasing that is important, increasing our ability to partner with those organizations. And instead of just offering pizza as that snack, actually empowering people in community who can cook healthy food, who can introduce cultural foods into these communities. That is the kind of work that has to be done. And like I said, the need is only going to get greater. The cost of food has been going up. We're not really talking about global warming and how that's impacting things. We're not talking about how trade, you know, I've been listening to a ton of podcasts talking about this issues with shipping containers and, you know, what are people going to buy for Christmas? That same shipping crisis is affecting food. You know, I was buying lettuce for an organization we provide food to, and the price literally in a week went up by $20 for a case of lettuce. So now we have to decide, okay, you know what, are we still going to provide them lettuce so they can have salad with their meals, or do we have to provide something else? And that's just on a small scale, you know, so look at how that's affecting us on a larger scale. So in terms of moving forward, the need is only going to increase. There are many people who have and have been implementing solutions. We need to be given the power, given the right to do what we need to do and support community. That's my piece.
I wasn't sure. I think what Zakiya is saying is extremely important, that we recognize that the crisis is getting worse, and it may no longer be the funder's flavor of the month, but it doesn't change the fact that the emergency is increasing. So, you know, I will bring up global warming because many places where our food is grown that we import during the winter and spring, we only have a few short months where we can grow food in this country. Many of the places we get our food from have been compromised by fires, floods, droughts, etc. We're in a dire crisis, and yet we still are struggling just for a few square inches of space to store food. And as Zakiya said, like, there is a poised and ready huge network of both Black and Indigenous organizations, communities, and allies, and many others who could very rapidly begin to transform and bring together resources and be adaptive, et cetera, but the inertia and the absolute refusal, even of particularly the provincial government, which is sitting on $6 billion of COVID funding and not allocating it, but trying to instead build a highway across our farmland. That's provincial government has a lot of control over this city. And one of the things the city kept saying to us was, well, we'd like to do X or Y, but the province won't let us. So that's something we have to keep in mind. And if we're talking about the future of our work, it's like a future of our survival that we're talking about, actually. And if we're, you know, talking about how are we going to get from A to B, I think one of the first things we have to recognize is, as Zakiya said, this is our own tax dollars. Governments are hired, elected to work for us, to serve our interests. And ironically, those bureaucrats sitting in their little ivory towers getting their Uber Eats to the door are also going to go hungry. I mean, ironically, ultimately, even if we had to build a guerrilla food system, people are going to be coming to us and asking us for help because they didn't think about it. They're not connected to where their food comes from. So basically, food sovereignty is a evolve or die issue. And really, if we're going to get it, we have to stop being polite and incrementally trickling along and letting them pat us on the head and see if they can get us to act like crabs in a bucket. We have to come together and we have to fight together on a solidarity front. And we have to demand the opportunity, the ability, the space, the infrastructure. We have to make them commandeer it under emergency measures if necessary, so that we can import a whole bunch of food, maybe from our farms down in Jamaica, maybe from our brothers and sisters who have farms over in Africa, wherever, whatever. There's many ways that we can adapt and innovate if they simply remove the barriers, the obstacles, and the racism that prevents us from doing what we need to do. Hey, I'm really angry, in case you didn't know this.
Thank you, Josephine, for your anger, and I think that's very important. Lori, and I know you've spoken to this earlier, like, please go off.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, everything they're saying hits home, but I'll just bring that to a complete, like a different level in that as an Indigenous, like, yeah, I mean, as an Anishinaabe Kwe, a mother, an auntie, hopefully someday a grandmother, all of these roles I carry in my community, our ability to exercise food sovereignty is definitely kind of a do or die for us. It is a future of our survival because, maintaining access to traditional food sources and land is absolutely inextricably linked to our survival and the survival of our teachings and, who we are, our title, our treaty rights, it absolutely is all tied together. And I think, 50% of Indigenous people that are living on reserves, and I would argue even higher, are facing severe food insecurity, along with other things like lack of access to fresh drinking water and schools and, supports, social supports, medical supports around any type of violence perpetuated on them. There is so much lacking within our communities. And, when you are constantly walking through a state of grief and having to just pull your boots up. And, while we're dealing with all of the food insecurity and food sovereignty and all these issues that were coming with COVID, and we always say that Dashmoan Bamadzajin was started by a group of aunties in the community, myself, Suzanne Smoke, Brianna Olsen Bidawanaquat, their partner Nanook in Indigenous Harm Reduction. All of these things that we are doing is part of our everyday lives and how we deal with and honor our communities, like the work we're doing with the elders through Wigwam and the food we're bringing to them. I mean, obviously COVID highlighted the need for more and the absolute inequity. And it's true, all the racial inequity that comes with food and access to it. But this is something that they needed outside of that anyway, access to support and connection as people and all of these things. And I think that the future of Dashmoan Bamadzajin is that, because we also fall into that federal provincial piece, right? Like, whose responsibility are we? If you're a status Indigenous person, then you are linked to the Indian Act. And we are the community within this dialogue that we're all having that is still being managed by a race-based legislation. Like, I have a status card, my daughter has a status card, I have a number, and so all of these things is like so much to unpack. And it's like, where do you carve out a little piece of impact in your own space? And then how that impacts the other communities around us, like as the original caretakers and stewards of this land, like how do we ensure that our treaties are being honored so that we can continue in that role? So what I can say about what we're doing with Dashmoan, like, I mean, we're thinking about ways to be innovative with space and ways to be innovative with how we access food and ways to be innovative with money that we, of course we have crowdsourced funding. We are not we're not a funded organization. We're grassroots as well. And we work by relationship. And I can already see the ways we can share with the other folks around the table and how we can work in that way. But like looking at starting social enterprise, like fund our own food, fund our own opportunities, make our own stuff, buy in our own communities, buy in, Black communities, buy in Indigenous communities, support each other, support our food efforts in that way, and honor those initial relationships we had of sharing, and even with settlers, you know, like they wouldn't be here if we hadn't welcomed them. So the whole notion of philanthropic behavior within the Indigenous community is like, what? Like our philanthropic behavior allowed you to come onto this land and settle here, and us to understand the struggles of the nations that are also coming, and the very idea that you own land, right? It doesn't work that way. And so I think that really, like, grants are where it's at, you know, people donating to us is where it's at, but where it really is at is like those places and spaces where you have to push for land and for opportunity. And you're right about empty schools and empty spaces and places. I will tell you that we do have a really good relationship with the city of Toronto right now for our space. We cook out of Fort York Kitchen. And you know, you knew about our struggle for space. We were about to start off. We had hundreds of meals we were supposed to be doing for the elders. We lost our space. FoodShare, we were going to cook with you, and you had an issue with some plumbing or something going on. So we jumped into Fort York Kitchen. And I can tell you that that is an excellent example of the city giving back space and us working with them really, really well. There are kitchens all over the city right now that are not being used. And they have made the agreement with us, the woman who works in the kitchen there, Bridget, phenomenal, where it's like, this is us giving space back to you. So we are lucky in that we've been able to carve out space a little bit for now, right? But I just think that it's really about honoring our roles as Anishinaabe Kwe and matriarchs. And like, for me, the word no is the beginning of a negotiation. Doesn't, so yeah, miigwech.
Thank you. I think a lot of what I'm hearing from the panel so far is really for the city to get out of the way and give back to the people who, everyone's survival is dependent on the work of Indigenous and Black people, and that's something that people need to realize. Like, Antonia, what is the future of your work? What do you see in the future of the work you're doing?
Big goal. I mean, before Uplift Kitchen was even conceptualized, I was chatting with friends 5 or so years ago about my big plans to have a space, particularly geared towards Black mothers and children, where they could come and learn all sorts of skills, whether it was farming, whether it was learning how to write resumes and job interviews, and kind of just learning how to be autonomous in their own ways. And now with Uplift Kitchen, that idea has grown even more, still with assisting those in the Black community, because as everyone has been saying so far, like our community gets hit real hard with food insecurities and so many other things, as well as Indigenous communities. But since I can only speak from my experience, wanting to assist Black folks in any way we can with that, and just like wanting to do more than just food. Right now we're doing food, and it's going really well, and we're learning a lot. What we've been fortunate enough to do last year, especially, we did like a school drive, we did a clothing drive as well. We want to continue that momentum. We want to continue offering more and more resources to people, and people have been offering their services as well. I have friends who are educators. I have friends who do music. I have friends who, you know, run businesses, everything else. They're all willing and lined up to assist however we can whenever we get to that point. So big dream, Uplift Kitchen is no longer just in Ontario. We have hubs all over Canada. I have friends in BC who want to assist. I have family in England who wants to assist. I have friends like all over this province and all over Canada who just want to do what they can in the areas that they're in, because they also recognize the needs in their areas and surrounding spots as well too. So we just want to do as much as we can, but like everyone is saying too, there's only so much we can do with the limited resources that we have. And so being able to tap into that money pit that is just sitting there, and the people who are guarding it, that is the only reason why we'll be able to do what we do and be able to be successful in it. We can continue down this path of depending on those in our communities to assist, but as we all know, like, people can only give so much from what they have, and then eventually that taps out. So ultimate goal, Uplift becomes this big thing that eventually I don't even have to be at the helm of anymore. I want to be able to pass that on to other people. I want other people who used to benefit from our services to then take leadership roles. I want those individuals to be able to continue nurturing that in their communities and keep growing from there. Like, I've never wanted to get any sort of like spotlight or anything from the things that I involve myself in. And I always believe in passing on things to those who can do it better, have new ideas and new energy, and just to keep that going. So who knows? We've already done more than we could have ever imagined this past year and a bit. So who knows what happens next month or 6 months from now, but I'm ready. I'm ready. And I'm just so encouraged by all the conversations we're having and the people who are here. And I can't wait to touch base with all of you individually, whether it's in person or over the phone or whatever, because oh my God, like this is so invigorating. And this rage we're all feeling is so validated, and I just want to like keep rubbing that together until there's a fire. Like I just want to like rip through this city in terms of, you know, tearing down bridges and burning down all sorts of barriers, and I want to do that with you guys. So this is I'm chatting with my best friend right now on the side, and we're just like like feel all of it. Like every emotion we are all feeling right now is so real, and it's so great to be able to hear that from other folks and know that, like, yes, it's a struggle, but we still have that motivation. We still have that yearning to keep pushing and keep making what we're doing benefit even more people and keep like nurturing it. So yes, a lot of emotions.
Thank you. The emotions are valid and important in driving us to do the work we do. So this is the last question for today, and I will open for folks to also just speak to whatever they want to speak to after this question, or as you speak to the question. So the Toronto City Council unanimously passed a Toronto food charter over 20 years ago now, and yet we still have a growing crisis of food insecurity in the city. But the thing is that the current food charter is inadequate, it's outdated, and it has no mechanism to be enforced. We have discussed today, I think, many themes that could be included in a food charter that's meant to preserve our right to food. What else do we need to see in a food charter that can support Black and Indigenous communities, and what can it look like in a city when our rights, our food rights are respected and protected in a city? I'll just hand it to Zakiah to start off.
I think it's great to have a charter. I've reviewed that charter a number of times, but as you've mentioned, you know, there is no accountability with it. As far as I know, there is no budget that accompanies it. And, you know, the reality is we live in a capitalistic society. So everything requires some sort of capital, you know, whether it's people power, our hours that we're putting in. But let's be honest, the things that we're talking about, you know, require dollars. You know, they require us to get back the dollars that we're putting in. They require us to get back the dollars that so much people in our community are putting in, and requires, you know, corporate and other entities supporting and matching these dollars. You know, we've shown many times that we can do these kind of initiatives, but we need, like I said, it needs to be a level playing field. When I think about, you know, the future of this work and what our organization specifically needs, it's infrastructure. You know, we need space to be able to do the work that we need to do. You know, looking back at the Black Food Sovereignty Plan, you know, they talk about increasing access in Black food hubs and cultural markets. I don't actually know of a identified Black food hub. I would think the work that we're doing fits very close along that line, you know, same as other folks on this call. Would we fully identify ourselves that way? And the language that they use, because I read things very carefully, they say increase. So what have they been giving us towards infrastructure so far? Like, maybe it's just that I don't know, maybe we just don't know about it. You know, we might be outside of the loop. I highly doubt that, but I think it's really, you know, getting rid of all the long talking. You know, Josephine is known of a space down on Queen Street that has been vacant for a number of years now. You know, that was actually a hub that we used many years ago, back when the food basket started, when FoodShare was doing work in that specific space. It was taken away from us by the city, and now it's been sitting vacant. You know, it is an amazing, huge space that could be used for so much, but we don't get clear answers. You know, Josephine has been working tirelessly since I've been doing the COVID initiative. We've been talking back and forth. She keeps mentioning this space to me. I've gone by, I've measured it from outside. We've talked about all the different things we can do with it. We still don't have a solid answer from the city. You know, it is great that they're talking about putting together a plan, but unfortunately what I've seen, you know, many of my elders go through is they will say something like that, and then they'll need to commission a study, and then they will need to do research, and then they will need to do all these things that have been done time and time again, instead of just coming to us and saying, hey, you know what? We've pulled together a budget of $5 million. We have a strategy of how we can leverage that with corporate donors, double that. What would you guys do with it? That's what I want. You know, I want something real that we can say, look, let's tangibly get together. Okay, we've got this amount of folks here in the West. We've got this amount of folks here in the East. All right, let's develop, you know, a hub in each major location, pull together those who've been doing it. City, you can help keep us accountable. Community, you can help keep us accountable, and let us do the work. It is possible. We've been doing it. And we haven't even had time on this call to talk about the fact that, like, food insecurity affects the social determinants of health. It affects young people, you know, going to school and being productive and wanting to be learning and engaging. If you don't have a healthy breakfast, how are you going to pay attention in school? Many of our children are being labeled to have ADHD and this, that, and the other. No, they're food insecure. That's what it really boils down to. They're not eating healthy. They're eating a lot of junk. And so as a result, they're wired. They're eating a lot of sugary products and things that are subsidized. When you follow the money far enough, they're subsidized by our governments. So much food that we see in grocery stores are subsidized by our governments, yet we are not being subsidized with our own money to do the work.
That is so important. Josephine, you can go ahead.
I'd like to add that 100% what Zakaya said, but also, you know, we're in the middle of a global food war, by the way, right now. There was recently a UN food summit, which was actually a World Economic Forum food summit. And it was one of the first major summits that's been hijacked to such an extent. And that's specifically because the corporate rulers are trying to take over our food systems. They see food as the new oil, and their chemical industrial complex is trying to make sure that it can run and control our food systems and basically make us, you know, chemically induced people kibble and mete it out to us in rations rather than us have control of our own food sovereignty. This is a struggle we're in at the global level, but you can see it play out as you go down the ladder right to the local. Like, we tried to get a shipping container for a food depot placed on the private landlord space in St. Jamestown, and because of the non-competition commercial lease with Food Basics, they wouldn't let us put it there. So that, you know, it goes local to global, this struggle against who gets to control the food system. It's not just the government in between, which is the problem. It's also those forces at the same time. But I think also, you know, the city of Toronto is in a very good position, should they decide to work with us instead of against us, to fight back. And if this city wants to have a future, it better start doing that right now, because yeah, we do have the St. Patrick's Market. We have all kinds of resources and infrastructure. Y'all just have to make it available. Y'all just have to rezone it, whatever it takes. Use emergency measures, I don't care. Get the money from the feds, they got lots of it. Get the money from the province, they got lots of it. Go to court if we have to, because the right to food is a right to life. But if we don't do these things together, if we don't stand together in this way, we're going to be very, very sorry when my community starts to riot next spring because it's hungry. You know, these people from all over the world who've been brought here to live in a concrete jungle and then slowly starve to death. That's not cool. That's not okay. And I really think, you know, this city needs to understand that this isn't an optional. This isn't a maybe. This is this time to walk your talk or face the consequences. Oh, I was supposed to talk about one other thing. I'm so sorry. We are working very hard on creating an alternative system at the same time. We're not just advocating. You know, we're trying to work with our local farmers. We're trying to weave together and link people up. We don't have money, so we use time banking. There's a lot of ways that we can work around and within, but really, if we don't have storage space, if we don't have trucks, if we don't have kitchens, it's limited. It's too limited. But nonetheless, we got to do everything in our power, as Uplift has been doing, to build without their support, but at the same time, demand the space to continue to build in our own way.
Thank you. Antonia?
I'm just looking at the charter right now and just looking to see all the different ways that we and our different organizations have been doing this work. Specifically for Uplift Kitchen, we started off, yes, with a barbecue idea, but also we really dove even deeper into the food insecurity in the communities we wanted to serve. We looked specifically at making culturally appropriate food, making sure that we were giving people food that was nutrient rich, dense, like great for them to have, that wasn't just them going to any old food bank or getting stuff from people that they couldn't eat. a lot of our community are new immigrants, folks who've been in Canada for X amount of time, who don't necessarily speak the language or speak it very well, and just don't have the community or access that the rest of us do. And so in looking at this list and seeing what can actually be done better, everything, really and truly, and like it's frustrating that, you know, we have to keep telling those above us, around us, in whatever hierarchical positions that they're in, that it's not enough just to write this stuff down. We have to be about this. We have to make sure that we're pushing and actually doing the things that we have set out to do. This is 1976 when this was put out. Like, so much has happened since then. Like, I was born 10 years later. And like, I can tell you straight up, for those who've been doing this work before I was born, during those first like years of my life, and even up to now, if they're still fighting to make sure to keep their government in check, like, it's exhausting. It's very exhausting. And I am so in awe of the work that is being done in these organizations and other ones that aren't even represented here to uphold this charter. It's as if that they wrote it and then forgot about it because they saw that people were doing what they could do and they're like, okay, cool, they'll figure it out. No, like, there's so many things in here that I am like, when we look at food, it's just like it literally is just like the most basic of needs, but it is so important. So important. I don't go a day without having breakfast, even if it's me just having toast over, because I know that I will not function without having a little bit of something in my system for those few hours. And to know that there are people who go hours, days, without any service to any meals and wondering how they can get through their entire existence without regular meals or without meals that are good for them is infuriating. And it's more infuriating that we have to go out of our pockets to do so, to assist those who are doing that. We're going to do it because we recognize the need and because we're all people in here who do what we can to help those around us. We don't walk past people and go, well, they'll figure it out. We're giving them what we can. We're assisting them however we can because that's who we are as individuals. And the people that assist us, they have that in themselves as well. But without that steady support coming from those above, around, in between us, it can only last so long. So I just want to see this like dealt with. Like, I want to see this actually taken seriously. I want to see people really sitting down and you know, picking apart, and not only just, you know, putting down words. Like, I want to see actions. And that's why I said in the very beginning, it's not enough to have these conversations with people from City of Toronto. Like, I want them to come and look, come see, be a part of, come witness, talk with the people who are receiving these services, talk with the people who are helping to dole out these services to people. It's just, it feels like we talk in circles so much, but the work is getting done regardless. But what we need is that support. And as everyone was saying too, Zakai was saying as well, like, I look at all these empty buildings and I'm mad. I am mad. There is no reason why we should have had all these encampments around the city when there are empty apartment buildings, empty hotels, empty everything. I've only seen one spot in my community that they turned into a YWCA because that motel was being shut down anyway. And they said, you know what, let's do this thing for at least a year, assist these folks. And I've watched the women in that space flourish because they've had beds, they've had clean water, they've had places to store their items securely, they've had community. And that is the biggest thing here, is that people do not, they make communities wherever they are, but it's that much stronger and that much more effective if that community can be safe. At the same time, that community can be fed and clothed and educated however it can be. And if we're not doing the work to do that, to secure that for other people, like, what are we doing? What are we doing? So I'm excited to band together with all of you to do this. But yeah, we really need to just, we really need to be fighting more and more as much as we can and gathering other people to help us in this fight, because it is exhausting work. And we can only do so much until we burn out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lori?
Oh, hey, yeah. So, you know, I just like, my brain is working here. And I think that really so the Toronto Food Charter is interesting because, you know, it's about, what is it, like 20 years old. So around 2000, 2001. And if you look at it, there isn't a mention in there of Indigenous anything. So this is before we had a really, I think, coordinated voice that was kind of feeding into the city. So within the City of Toronto, there is the Indigenous Affairs Advisory Table. You know, we do have the Toronto Aboriginal Social Service Council here now. We have an Indigenous Affairs Office in Toronto for the first time, like a really, you know, stacked one with some strong people working within it. So the city has these mechanisms now to hear from our community, and that charter would never have flown now, because the first thing you have to do is acknowledge the land that you're on, and the fact that the entire possibility of you even being here and sitting here and having conversations about food sovereignty, food security, or like a charter, you have to acknowledge that land. So I really believe that you know, the way to leverage deeper conversations about food sovereignty and food security is through the City of Toronto's reconciliation plan within the Indigenous dialogue happening right now. In fact, it's interesting because I did get a call out to be part of a conversation that an innovative person working within the Indigenous Affairs Office in the city suggested that right now they're writing the reconciliation plan for the city with Indigenous folks, which is, you know, again, like, talk about reports done, talk about studies, talk about constantly looking at why something's happening. The moment anything happens in our community, we're going to do an inquiry, we're going to do a study, we're going to have conversations. We have the Royal Commission, we have Truth and Reconciliation, we have the MMIW reports, we have all of these things that say the same things over and over again. And where's the action, right? So the reconciliation piece within the city right now is even more heightened because of the, you know, place we find ourselves in 2021, where we're potentially more woke, where we have these mechanisms I've talked about that are pressuring the city to understand what working with Indigenous people looks like, what reconciliation looks like. And in that is this plan. So what we've talked about is including access to traditional Indigenous foods and food security within the reconciliation plan for the city. So leveraging that and saying, this is a big part of Indigenous people's success. This is a big part of their role, you know, is to understand how to care for our communities with food. And I just think that, you know, like anything that happened when the settlers came, you needed the Indigenous voice to press it forward. And I think that that food charter, that food security, that whole dialogue that needs to happen needs to be pushed within those frameworks of Indigenous reconciliation, Indigenous treaty rights, and like thinking about, you know, the community that holds the treaties in this area, and those ones that we talk about in the land acknowledgement. Like, those are your kind of, you know, stewards of what this food should look like and access to it, and that there should be, you can't have a reconciliation plan with Indigenous peoples in the City of Toronto and not have strong ethical access to food and food opportunities and, you know, food sovereignty for everybody, because that's what we did. Like, we taught people how to make food and how to survive in the land when they came here. So it just is really interesting to hear people talking about that, and, you know, how we can leverage those conversations, what it looks like. I really think that in order for the city, for the province, the country, but the city, you know, we're in, to reconcile with Indigenous people is to really honor everybody's right to food as it stands, one of the basic necessities. It's not a privilege, right? Like, it wasn't taken from you when you got here, so why should you be hoarding it and taking opportunities from the people that settled here and the Indigenous people that take care of it now? So I think that the pressure should come through alongside of the original caretakers and the stewards of the land, right? I think it's a big conversation that, you know, fits with everything that's happening now. And the cities want to give back to the Indigenous community, you know, land, space, what can we do? You know, and it really is truly unpacking their own biases with that conversation, right? Like, and it's not the people, it's the system often, because there are champions within that system that I've seen practically lose their jobs by pushing to make a difference, right? So yeah, I just think it's interesting because I'm hearing all of this and I'm like, it's in the reconciliation approach, because it's, yeah, it's important.
Very, very important. And we're waiting for questions to come in from the audience, but we haven't got any questions yet. But I just wanted to throw it back to all of you speakers today. How can people on the call, support the work you're doing? I know we just talked about, the city's role and what needs to be done. But what can people today on the call do to support this work? And anyone can go.
I'd like to, there's a couple of things. One is that there is a huge global counter mobilization pushing back in terms of that global food war. So look into that. It gets joined with Via Campesina, the National Farmers Union, and big forces like that to help push on the geopolitical level, because it does matter. It does make a difference, especially because we're a country that relies on imports. More locally, push the federal government to take a strong position towards sustainable, regenerative farming and food growing, and pushing back against the corporate farming system, which is destroying our ability to have food sovereignty or even security. More locally, we're having an event on Wednesday, a media event to demand space so that we can continue to offer support to our community through the winter, and we can not just have to do things outside under an event tent. We're not the only food program. There's many food programs in our community that do not have any space. Our community is being literally denied its rights on so many levels. So if you can support us on Wednesday around 1:30 in the middle of St. Jamestown, or click on the link to sign the petition or send letters to the city or whatever, I feel like we're like this sort of microcosm, this case that combines all these horrible issues and shows how the injustice plays out on the ground. So helping us, I think, is going to help to shift how this is going. But I think also, like the African food basket, we want to be their downtown distribution. Black food sovereignty is being talked about and not delivered on. And it needs to be connected and seen as connected to Indigenous reconciliation and pushed forward in a real meaningful way. And all those allies, all the folks who are out there who aren't necessarily of African descent or whatever, please understand that, if we don't have food sovereignty, if we're not able to bring our wisdom, our knowledge, our labor to the work of transforming the food system, you don't have much of a chance either. So I think that's a number of ways. And then of course, like just direct, straight up, help Uplift Kitchen and others of us with some money so we can buy more healthy food for our poor families who are struggling. There's a lot of ways that we can but also think carefully when you buy food. Think carefully who you're buying food from, and even challenge the corporations where you're buying the food. Why does this have to come from here? Why is that GMO, et cetera, et cetera? We got to get vocal. We got to say things. We can't just be polite Canadians and wait until it's too late and we have no more rights, food or otherwise.
One thing I'd like to say real quick, because, this has been a very passionate sort of fiery conversation, and I do want to acknowledge support from the city. The CABR unit, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit at the City of Toronto, has done a lot to support, directly the food basket and the African Caribbean Black community through supporting us throughout COVID and making, advocating for us and having us access, certain funds and partnerships. But the need is so much that the support, it almost feels like nothing. I don't mean to kind of make it seem so negative, but $100,000 when you have over 150,000 people who are labeled as food insecure. We're not even talking about the people who are house poor. It only goes that far. There was talk about, this new food sovereignty plan potentially, looking at $1 million a year. I divided that number by the amount of people that are labeled as food insecure in Toronto. It works out to be $9 per person. So think of it as an organization getting $9 to help somebody. That is, many of us who do this work, it's a passion. We do it because we love it. We do it at the cost of our families sometimes. We do it at the cost of our mental health because we feel obligated to do this. And it doesn't have to be that way. One thing I'd like folks on this call to keep in mind is next year's an election year. It's a municipal election. The mayor is going to be going up, city councilors, let's make sure that food security, food sovereignty, and this Toronto Food Charter, let's make sure this is something that they're talking about. Let's make sure that when individuals, news organizations are out in community talking about the municipal election and what is important to people, let's make sure our community knows how to talk about these issues and advocate for themselves and advocate for us. I think it's critical. When you look at the word sovereignty, it's about ownership, it's about power. The goal of any food sovereignty plan is to empower those who are not empowered to be able to long-term have full control.
Yeah.
So a food sovereignty plan is not the African Caribbean Black community or the indigenous community depending on the city forever. It's about putting and investing into us now so that we can do what we need to do for ourselves moving forward. And by us doing that, we will support the city, support those who need it. If people who have to go to work to support these various corporations and everything else that spins in this cycle, if they can't do that, nothing works. So we are part of a bigger, collective that needs to be supported and needs to be sustained. And more we're looking at, how do we, get technology involved in this, that, and the other. People are still going to be needed in anything that happens moving forward. We've seen that time and time again. And if people are not healthy and eating properly, it is going to break down. It is going to fall apart. We look at news stories and talk about what happens in quote unquote third world countries. But if you go into some of our communities, it is worse off than the places that they are labeling these things. So I think it's important to look at how we get political, how we make this an election issue next year. And I know we're all going to end up talking about that at some point, given the conversation happened here. Lastly, I really want to acknowledge the work of women who've been leading this work. Like I kind of caught myself a second ago where I looked at it. I'm the only male panelist on this, advocating for this. So many places that I've gone to drop off food that the food basket has been involved in, I drop it off to other women. I'm glad it's being done, but I would like to see more men get involved in this work. In many countries and many cultures, men are the ones in the kitchen. We're the ones in the field. So we are connected to this, but for some reason in North America, we somehow get removed. And as a result, we don't necessarily take these issues as serious. I do, because I was raised in a family that has done that. I love to cook. I love to share food with my family and friends. So that's why this is an important issue for me. But I had that upbringing. Not everybody has that. And through a lot of the programs the Food Basket has done, we've tried to get young people, young men, young women involved in that process. And it's critical. Food it's a human right. It's so sad that we have to say that living in a city like Toronto, but yeah, this has to be repeated. It is a human right, and we must continue to fight and challenge those who are trying to take it away from us.
Lori, is there anything you wanted to say, Antonia? How can people support the work you're doing?
Sorry, you cut out. I wasn't sure if you were talking to me. I didn't hear you. Yeah, I think that it really goes back to exactly what everybody's saying, continue the fight. Make it a political issue, make it something that is really about. Also, like, one of the things that we do with Dashmawan that we're really proud of is that we are really conscious about the food we buy and where we get it from and how we get it and who we get it from. Like, I can tell you how difficult it is for us to serve traditional food and access to it. Like, we can't go out and pay a hunter to get us a deer or a moose or an animal. We have to actually go out and buy farmed meat because, there's lots of stipulations to how and what and where and the ownership of food and land. And they're just issues that can be impacted politically. I think standing beside Indigenous people, Black communities, really working together to force the narrative to really be about caretakers, stewards of the land, people that come from Indigenous places, and also recognizing and remember that many of us come from Indigenous places to begin with. One of the best teachings I ever got from one of my elders is we all came from the land at some point in time. And we forget that, you forget that it's not just about something coming out of a box or a package or just coming into your fridge easily. There's a story behind that and a richness to where people have honored their teachings in their communities and, the art and the work behind where that food comes from. So I think it's really about that. And it's just about keeping to push, keeping to fight, keeping together. And let's try and work collaboratively as much as we can to further our voices and find ways and have conversations like this where we can find like-minded people, right? I think that's really important. And pushing the reconciliation piece within the government and not making it a buzzword. Like, what do you mean? What does reconciliation mean? You know, going back to those original principles within the treaties that we would share, we would honor, we would nurture, and that we would benefit from that relationship together and what that means. And so a lot of that is around sharing resources, right? And questioning the pushback when Indigenous folks want their treaties honored, and, you know, knowing that you're in good hands when it is happening with Indigenous folks being at the center of a lot of it. So yeah, miigwech.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing in terms of support that we need just continues to come down to money, and assisting us with monetary things, and making sure that we can continue purchasing things for our families. We've had people throughout this process reach out to us to donate food, like bulks amount of like produce and things. So that's been really good. We've been able to get FoodShare boxes as well, which has been so beneficial for our families who only need fresh produce and don't need cooked meals. But yeah, the biggest thing is funding for us. We're lucky to have a space right now where we can work out of. How long that lasts, I'm not sure, because generally they are up and running and have a lot of programming that they do out of the space. So we don't know what that's going to look like, say, come January. So along with money, yeah, and eventually we're going to need more space. But that's those are the biggest things we need right now, and it's just the consistency of those things need to be there while we're still trying to seek out extra funding in terms of grants. And other things we need to make sure that we have that rolling, or else the stopping and starting is just it's hurting our progress, and it's hurting that accountability and connection with our families as well too, because we don't want to keep going, okay, sorry guys, we're out of money, we can't do anything for the next who knows how long, like see you in a couple months. We want to be able to continue that going. So hopefully hopefully that's something that comes out of this or anything, and we're able to get more assistance that way. But yeah, so far this has been so helpful just to have more conversation. So I now have 3 other people to reach out to have conversations with, and that already is so much more than I bargained for. So
Yeah, thank you. So we're at 3:33 now, and we planned to schedule till 3:30. So pretty much I'm just gonna go off to the closing. Thank you all. Thank you to the speakers, Lori, Josephine, Antonia, Zakaya, for being here and sharing the space with us, and taking time out of your busy schedules and really speaking to such an important topic. And thank you for all the FoodShare staff behind the scenes, making sure everything's running smoothly. Andrea, Mo, Renee, Peter, thank you all. And also thank you for everyone watching, whether on Instagram or right here on the Zoom chat. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope you can take something away from this talk today. And I would just speak a little bit to what FoodShare is doing. So we're running the Right to Food campaign currently, and we have put out a petition to the City of Toronto to push for a new food charter that centers the leadership of Black and Indigenous and racialized people, people with disabilities, workers and renters. And we're asking for a mechanism for the city to be held accountable to the communities who are being impacted by their food policies, and also allocate the sufficient funding and resources to realize the right to food in Toronto. We're also calling for people to support the St. Jamestown petition for the city for adequate indoor space to operate their food security work. Josephine had mentioned this earlier, and you can support all the organizations represented here today by donating money and resources to them. We're gonna have all the links in the chat as well. You can go to our website. We have all the links to the organizations, and you can continue to support and learn more and follow. And yes, thank you all for being here today. And we've come to the end.
Thank you, Hansel.
Thank you for all your leadership in this.
You guys really cheered me up today. You made me feel a little better. Hope to talk to you soon. Let's keep it moving.
Thank you.
Boy, we're in a real hurry to get off, eh?
It's really amazing. Thank you
Let's
guys.
honestly try to talk within the next week.
Yes. Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
great. Thanks, guys.